So I guess my perspective is a little different because it's the agency perspective in terms of how we work with clients to try and help to innovate. And it's difficult, and I think it's worth mentioning the way that I sort of think about what we do is that we generate insight and strategy, we create things, we distribute those things, and we try and measure how effective they are. And when we're creating something, we tend to think of that as either something which is campaign-centric or something which has a longer storyline or narrative that maybe is episodic and sort of manifests itself in various different formats, or something which is a utility, a service that we are designing, something new. And that's the bit that we think about the most. So forgive me if a lot of my thinking is oriented around that piece of what we tend to try and do for our clients. So I thought I'd start by just not giving an exhaustive list, but maybe some of the things that I think I've seen over the years that make it a little bit, make it quite difficult. So the first is what I describe as the digital marketing envelope. And I remember when I started 2 decades ago, it was actually reasonably easy to initiate, sort of innovative work, something that was interesting and different, because the internet as a marketing channel and device was pretty much irrelevant. It was the preserve of actually some quite senior sponsors inside the client, and whether you got it right or wrong was largely irrelevant. So there was a great canvas to kind of do stuff and think about stuff in quite an innovative way. And of course what's happened is that it's become hugely material to the performance of brands and businesses. And so what tends to happen is that if there is available bandwidth of people or budget, the way that tends to get oriented or directed is how can we optimize and improve the performance of what we're already doing, because we're under a huge amount of pressure to deliver results. And so it's become increasingly difficult to think as an agency and help our clients to think beyond business as usual. So I'll come back to this in a second in terms of how we try and overcome that problem. One of the other perspectives is what's called technical debt. And I might have changed the vertical axis here. I might have said suboptimal and awesome rather than crap and awesome. But what tends to happen is that, and it's quite understandable, is given the pressures of deadline and the commercial pressures and budget pressures, is that very often what happens when you're doing a product release or a platform development is that those pressures will mean that you'll take certain shortcuts or make certain kludges, and over time the compound effect of that creates what we call technical debt. So, and the reason why that's important in terms of innovation is, let's just say, for example, that one of our automotive clients has asked us to reinvent the car configurator, and we will of course come up with lots and lots of clever ideas as to how to do that. And we are quite conscious that in the background there will be a sort of reasonably sized bill attached with our thinking, but probably a bill 4 or 5 times that attached to internal IS, who then say that because of the technical debt and the way that we've built our system, there are lots and lots of workarounds and things that we have to resolve that make it very expensive for us to deliver on this customer vision. So this is a very real challenge that we are quite cognizant of when we're thinking about how we innovate. I think one of the other areas is this is quite inelegant, I'm afraid, but it's not agile. And I guess the point here is that a lot of process and approach inside clients is quite understandably aimed at mitigating risk and optimizing commercial performance. And what that means, certainly in our world, is that there is a desire to understand what is being specified and created, what that's going to do, how that's going to perform, how long that's going to take, what if it goes wrong, all those sorts of things. And that is unfortunately not the behavior required, or the approach requires, when trying to be more innovative. What it requires you to do is it requires you to try and fail. It requires you to do that repeatedly. And of course, understandably, again, there's a lot of risk attached to that, and people are not used to that. So, and I think the reason why that's important is this guy, he framed it quite nicely, actually. This is a guy called Theodore Sturgeon. There's not very many of us, so I'm quite embarrassed that it took me 46 years to discover this guy, and it was actually Chris Clark who, somewhere in the audience, introduced me to him. He was a science fiction writer in the 1950s. And his law, Sturgeon's law, was 90% of everything is crud. Now, I've contemporized that. 90% of everything is crap. But I think it's important because when you're innovating, the problem is that most of what you produce won't be right. It might not necessarily be crap. You can learn quite a lot from it, but it won't be right. So back to a process or a methodology which is designed to mitigate risk from the system, because the commercial pressures on all of us to perform are extremely important, then being agile is almost antithetical to the way that we want to operate as an organization. So how, as an agency, do we try and help our clients with those challenges and try and be successful? He looks reasonably successful. That's why I chose the picture. So I think the first thing, there are meant to be some arrows here, but it did occur to me when I arrived that they probably wouldn't show up. But if you can imagine, it sort of goes roughly like that. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but at the center of the principles that we try and work to is try to be solving a problem. Is try to be solving a problem that's relevant to the clients. Because so often what we see is that it's a neat bit of thinking, it's an elegant piece of technology, it's whatever it is, but actually it's not aimed at solving a problem. And going back to the marketing envelope, it's so much easier to work in this way if actually what we're trying to do is aimed at some of the stuff that's really important below that dotted line in terms of resolving commercial performance and thinking differently about how we do that. So that's where we start. I think the first and most important thing is to connect, is to connect with people that don't necessarily start with the specific domain expertise or industry expertise that you are sort of concerned with. And I think it's, what is it? Is incentive. I think 70% of the problems that are solved on that platform, the crowd sharing problem platform, are solved by people who have a domain expertise unrelated to the specific problem at hand. So the first thing is connect, is gather eclectic views and views that you would not expect. The second thing is for us in our sort of non-visual circle, is experiment. So don't talk theoretically, is actually build something, is create something very, very quickly. And of course, that's the advantage of having a technology skill set inside an agency, is that you can create stuff very quickly and have a hypothesis that you are trying to prove or disprove. It can be complicated, it can be simple, but do that quickly. So, and very often we think of that, it's a slightly unfortunate term because it comes from a slightly different, less reputable industry, is we call it the convincer. Is we've created something which the client can see and can work with and acts as the convincer inside the organization to convince other people that there is a problem and there's something that we could do to resolve that problem. So it's real, it's tactile, you can play with it, it works. And then the next step is keep going. Is, back to Theodore Sturgeon, the problem is that most of it will not work. So there's got to be a commitment to carrying on. I think, what is it? Is Angry Birds was the 50-second game that Rovio invented. And it was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the others had not been successful. So the challenge is to be committed to keeping going. And once you've been doing that, is reconnect. Is reconnect and ask the question of a community of people that are not necessarily attached to what you're doing, as to whether what you have done is still relevant, and are you trying to solve the same problem? is very often what will happen is you will iterate this journey and actually you end up in a slightly different place. You're solving a slightly different problem. Instagram is a perfect example of that. So those are the principles of innovation that we try to adopt. I think there are some foundations, some important foundations as well. We've tried to nurture what we call a community of innovators. I think we have about 250 or 300 worldwide from all sorts of different walks of life and different places that we constantly socialize our ideas with. I think the second thing is that I think you've got to be doing it yourself. I don't think it's very helpful to be kind of advocating innovation, with a client unless you're actually active and doing it yourself. So we build products ourselves that we use to kind of automate what we do. And we have all sorts of other projects, the result of which one have just appeared in the Barbican as a prize winner around innovation, so that we can say that we're committed to doing that as well, and then create innovation programs, obviously, for our clients.